Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Now I'm waiting for other students to get on board so that we can start. Today, like I promised you the other time, we are going to talk about the constitution and the constitution making process. It's an area that is very demanding sometimes for students and mainly tested in paper 3, tested in section C and also in section A of paper 1 examination. So kindly bear with us as we wait for the others to join for a few minutes, then we can start. I also want to take this juncture to remind you that we are releasing the results for the exam that was done in the past, and in the process then we request you to follow up with your specific teachers so that we have everybody's results in the Zeraki system before we can release them, to make the whole process a process that is very, very successful. Now, I would want to hope that by the end of this session, we will have achieved some significant understanding or objectives in terms of this topic, that is the constitution and the constitution making process. I know it's not a very palatable one, but then we shall ensure that everybody gets on board and at least you get questions. Once in a while, I will unmute you for those who have questions, and also we can use the chat forum then to raise some of the issues. I hope you have your pens and books to write some of the major highlights, so that even as we start, then you can make reference. You can make reference in response to some of the areas that probably have a challenge. However, you will attest or you will confirm with me, at least we are 73 of us now, we can start, we have a quorum. You can attest to the fact that this is an area that is very common in the exam, and whenever questions come from this area, then we have students with all forms of challenges. And these are the things then we want to try and see then that we assist where necessary. So I'm expecting people to behave. I don't want people to see people writing behind there on the screen. And I will start by talking about constitution and the constitution making process. For those who are joining, we have said, and I want to restate it, that the constitution and constitution making process is a topic that has majority of the questions in paper 1 and are found in paper 1, section C, and also in section A. Those are questions to have questions from this area tend to also test in paper 2, and particularly in an area we refer to as the constitution in other parts of the world, the unwritten constitution. It's a very small fraction because questions here come from an area we refer to as the Constitution of Britain, where you can be asked to name the sources of that constitution, but the majority of the questions then are in paper one. Now we start right away by asking ourselves what it is that then we can define, what it is that we can define as the Constitution of Kenya, or what is it that we refer to as a constitution. And I want to be very brief to give an analogy about the constitution and the constitution, the constitution first. And you will realize that constitution, as we know it, is a term that refers to the principles that guide two parties, those that are governed and those that govern the people. That would be the simplest definition of a constitution. And this set of principles then, they galvanize how the people in a society, how a group of people in an organization, how a welfare society undertakes its mandate. And therefore, we can, in a nutshell, say that the Constitution is found nearly in all other organs of not only government, but even in non-government organizations, in our welfare organizations, in every institution. Why? Because a constitution will then be those set of principles. So it's not necessarily that it must be written, but we know it in the world today that constitution, those set of principles then can be found in any organization, even in your home, because there are rules which everybody in a setting, like a home setting, is supposed to follow. There are rules that are supposed to be adhered to. As the children, as a parent, as a father, as a mother, and there are rules or there are principles which then ensure that that family setup then, that there is law and order, or law prevails, or order prevails within that family setup. Now we look at the historical background of a constitution. Now, a constitution, as we know it, is as old as man himself. Why am I saying this? Is because the earliest of a constitution that we can define then can be seen in the time that man started, can be seen in the time that man started practicing government in the Neolithic period. The need for law and order then is the one that we see made some principles to be set at those very earliest time, and that man had to follow. And of course, we see from that civilizations grew, and as time passed, of course, we had civilizations in places like Greek. We had civilization in different other, so we had civilizations like even in Persia and so on and so forth in the Persian kingdom. But then these principles developed, and that's why we are going to see the earliest of such principles to be documented, of course, will be seen in attempt to establish a government in places like Athens, in Greek, a very early Greek, classical Greek civilization, where we see the likes of people like Akina Plato, the likes of people like Akina Plato, people like Aristotle, and so on and so forth. Now, when we come closer home, because these are civilizations that grew and developed the world to what we have today in the postmodern world, but then you realize that closer home in Kenya, the history of this constitution is not just after we attained independence. There are set principles that existed in the society before then the colonial government took place. That means that even before the advent of the British administration in Kenya, then we still have and the principles that govern the people in the society. There are laws. And that's why we're going to see some of the sources of law. Among them are the customs, because Africans in Kenya, up to the time in the 18th century, was still governed by some custom or customary rules that were supposed to be followed by everybody in the society. And you will realize that when we talk about it, then the constituent relationship between people in the society and how they did things, the ethos around that, the customs and the customs that the people followed at that time can be defined as constitution. They might not have been written, and therefore we can refer to them as unwritten sources of principles that governed the society at that time. What that means, gentlemen, is that as we speak about this constitution, then you will realize that in the decentralized systems of government, then we had some political organizations and laws that people are supposed to follow. For example, there was a time when one was supposed to go through marriage. There were taboos, meaning that there were things that people in the society were not supposed to do. And if they happened to have done them, then of course there were repercussions that came with that. So we can, in a nutshell, say that the constitution in the pre-colonial setup can be seen as the earliest form of guidelines or principles that governed the people way back, even before the advent of colonial administration. However, when the British came, then they came with their own rules and regulations. These rules were passed in the legislative councils. These rules are the ones then that made up the land ordinances that we knew existed during the colonial period. They are the same that pushed people from their original homeland, then took them to reserves, particularly for those who lived in the very fertile areas there. They are the same laws that defined the provision of cheap labor for the white settlers. They are the same laws that invited the white settlers to come to Kenya. So it's a long history, and we can try to divide it then from the period pre-colonial, then to the colonial period, and how the constitution then was put down in writing in the legislative council, and then it was executed then by the governor and the centralized administration that then was brought about by the British. Then after that, we shall, as we of constitution, that we can look at it in terms of the period now in post-colonial period. So here we have three very important period here, and in periodization we look at the pre-colonial, the colonial, and then the post-colonial. The post-colonial actually is the outcome of the constitution that we got from the colonial government, that the Africans adopted, Africanized the same constitution through what we refer to as constitutional changes, of course, which were defined or which were governed then by some set principles or demands then by the society or the political class to achieve a certain milestones. And we shall look at them as we progress forward. But then now allow me to, once I've given that introduction, that the Constitution has existed since times immemorial, that we can classify the Constitution developmental milestone from the pre-colonial, then colonial and post-colonial, and the fact that we must understand deep in ourselves that, or deep in our minds, that then the Constitution we are talking about then is not something that is very recent. It is as old as man himself. That's why we're going to see defines then the differences between a written constitution and an unwritten constitution. Like those countries like Britain that have an unwritten constitution. The reason why they have an unwritten constitution is because they have a very rich history. They have a very old history that dates back up to 12 even AD and so on and so forth. And we have to realize that that's why they adopted, they decided to adopt an unwritten form of a constitution. Then we have those nations that were formed in the modern world. The period from the 18th century going forward, we call it the modern world. And particularly in Europe, we have what we refer to as modern Europe. Then most of these countries like Kenya, their constitution came in the period of the modern world. And of course, now we also talk about the post-modern world and so on and so forth. But then of interest is we have to understand where we are coming in terms of a constitution and the constitution making process there. So we can define, because I don't have many of the materials to refer to, but then from what I know, we can define the constitution as then a set of agreed principles. They can be referred to as a set of agreed principles and rules according to which then a state is governed. So our aim here today is to talk about the constitution, not about the constitutions in the home, a constitution in a school scenario where we have rules and regulations that are set to guide the learners, the teachers, the support staff, non-support staffs, and other people in learning the school. But we want to look at the constitution in terms of a state. What defines a state? Because also that is very key. When we want to understand a constitution, like in the case of Kenya, the guidelines or the principles that govern a state, then we must look at a state. Where does it come from? For example, the concept of nation state is not something that is, it's very old. It's in the modern world. That's when we say it started in Europe, when there was the setting of geopolitical boundaries in different nations that defined then that specific boundary, those within that boundary as occupying a state. For example, a state like Germany, a state like Britain, a state like Kenya, a state like South Sudan, a state like Uganda, a state like South Africa. So what happens is that a state is governed by some principles. And you're going to see them when you look at even the Constitution of Kenya, that a state is defined by some specific characteristics that we see in a state. For example, it must have a jurisdiction. It must have an area within which that law operates. That is now what we call jurisdiction. It must be sovereign. And the sovereignty of a state is the applicability of law within that state, and it is allowed and accepted by the people. That's why we are going to see the fact that the constitution itself, because all the countries and states in the world, they have a constitution. We are going to see a scenario where the constitution in itself is the supreme law. And it is within it then that the other skeletons, other appendages, then form what we refer to as sources of law within that supreme law. Very good example is that in the Kenyan scenario, we have the supreme law as the Constitution of Kenya. It's a sovereign, applicable principle in the country that even other nations must respect, because the supreme law, and it surpasses any other law. And therefore, it is within that supreme law that we derive what we refer to as acts of parliament to guide operation and come up with law to govern some specific sectors and departments in government. We also use the same to come up with the penal code. The penal code is the one that is used now in the judiciary to come up with the laws that govern how we solve our disputes, whether they are criminal or or civil. So that penal code is the one that we say then is derived from acts passed in parliament, taken then to the judiciary, and of course, which now the judiciary through the various organs within it, like those in charge, like the magistrates and whatever, then they take and come up with a penal code that is supposed to be used to ensure the rule of law applies in the country there, or the set principles that are there. So by definition, we must understand that these principles that apply in a state must apply in a state where there is sovereignty, where there is jurisdiction, or there is a geographical area within that which is applicable, and also where there is a rule of law. Those are characteristics that define a state. And this rule of law, of course, is derived from this document that we refer to as a constitution. So a constitution is that set of principles. And when compiled together, these sets of principles, then these sets of principles then can be defined. These set of principles can be defined as can be categorized, as one document if they are all of them placed in one document, like a book, like the one you're having, or like the one you use to write your history notes. So if you compile all that into one, then it becomes one document. Sometimes that is not the case. One might want to have those documents scattered in different state organs and the state archives, and that's now then we say, and we define that form of principles that are not in one document. We refer to them by a specific name, like we are going to see moving forward. So by definition, we must always note that the term constitution refers to a set of principles, a set of guidelines, then that are used to govern a state. So those guidelines then, a state is not something that is immaterial. The state is material. It is material in the sense that those principles are meant to guide people. Those guidelines then are supposed to enhance the rule of law between parties. So in a state, these two parties are the governors and those who are governed. And again, now this one takes us back to Form 1 work. The governors then are those that are chosen to rule the people. And that now tells us then in that constitution, it will define a state as whether the people are ruled in a dictatorial way, whether people are ruled in a democratic way, and even in a democratic way, whether it is constitutional democracy, whether it is liberal democracy, or whether it is parliamentary democracy. All that will be stated in various articles or in various sections then found within the Constitution, or chapters, for example. So we are going to see how those various aspects are practiced there. So we have the governors, those who govern the people and how they do it. Those who are governed also, they have what we refer to as responsibilities. They have what we refer to as responsibilities. By responsibility, I mean those that are governed by the in the Constitution as the second party now, because you have the governed and those who govern the people, we refer to them in a constitutional term as citizens, because a constitution must define those who are governed. And those who are governed in this case are the citizens. They enjoy some freedoms that they demand and rights that they demand from those that govern them, and which they promise to do, to give to those people, while at the same time, they also are expected then in response to have some responsibilities to the state. And all these then are found in the Constitution. For example, you're going to see them in a document we refer to as the Bill of Rights. This Bill of Rights, though it's universal, then it's applicable in different states like Kenya in different degrees. It's a universal document, of course, passed in the past and accepted, generally in the world, but different countries in that Bill of Rights, there are those who enjoy, it is enjoyed in different levels. It can be constricted depending on the number of rights that are there, because countries are not the same. For example, the constitution, our constitution, the Bill of Rights in the Kenyan new constitution, then is such that we enjoy what we refer to as an enlarged Bill of Rights. Why do we say that we use the word enlarged? Because it has given the citizens a lot of freedoms and expect them also to undertake some significance, sense of responsibility, even when enjoying those rights. And this, what is happening in Kenya, probably is not happening in Uganda. You know the nature of Uganda as a state today under the leadership of Museveni. So we enjoy, both of the countries have a Bill of Rights, but then the Kenyans enjoy more rights than those in Uganda. So what I'm trying to say is that in a constitution, of course, we'll always have a Bill of Rights, particularly enshrined or envisioned in the constitution to provide then for a framework for the governed people we refer to as citizens. Because it's not everybody who is in a state who qualifies to be a citizen. You can be in a state and you're an alien. So, and we talked about them in Form 1 during the topic citizenship. So, so the constitution basically will try to define now the relationship between the state, between the governors and those who are governed in a state. And I think in that one, it is understood and very well understood there. Now, from there, we ask ourselves, what are the characteristics of, what are the components of a constitution? What are the components of a constitution? Now, a constitution, as we know it, of course, depending on the type of constitution, and in all of them anyway, you always find that the constitution has some specific main elements that define it. These components are sub aspects that you find within a constitution, and they include, for example, a good constitution all over the world. As a component of a constitution, must have something we refer to as the duties and the rights of citizens. They must have the duties and the rights of citizens. They must have the duties and the rights of citizens. What I'm saying in this statement is that these duties we are talking about is that every constitution must ensure that every citizen is provided with those rights. And they are found basically in the Bill of Rights. They are found in what we refer to as the Bill of Rights. And it's not in totality the Bill of Rights. We can even find these rights outside the rights, the Bill of Rights, through, for example, the acts that are passed in Parliament, like the Children's Act of 2001, the Sexual Offences Act, and so on and so forth, that ensures then that the people in a state enjoy their freedom to the fullest. Then also a good constitution must consist of the three organs or the three arms that defines government or defines a state. That is the executive. It must also have an institution we refer to as the legislature, and it must also have a judiciary. This institution must function coherently to serve the citizen, like in Kenya to serve Wanjiku, but then in a democracy, like in any other country, then these three arms, the executive, they must be separate from one another, or they must enjoy something referred to as separation of power. And this separation of power is exercised through ensuring that the executive, which tends to have more powers than the other two, then the other two are protected from the nature of executive as it may tend to usurp the powers of the others by ensuring that the legislature is the only supreme institution that makes law. So it enjoys something referred to as the supremacy of parliament. Then the judiciary must enjoy something we refer to as the independence of the judiciary. So such that then the executive cannot meddle. The executive then cannot twist the body we refer to as the judiciary, and also does not twist the parliament or the legislature by making sure that the legislature enjoys a unique aspect entitled in the Constitution, where we refer to it as the supreme organs, and therefore enjoying supremacy there. I hope that point is also understood. Then also another component of the Constitution is that the Constitution, of course, must provide for distribution of power among the various arms of the government. And that distribution of power, as mentioned earlier, then or in my for point there, is that the Constitution must provide then for this power being separated and enjoyed with some sense of independence in the three arms that we have talked about there. That, of course, must be shown in the Constitution through the separation of powers between the three arms. That which is supposed to execute, then its work is purely to execute. That which is supposed to make and amend laws, then the powers remain particularly that. That which is supposed to interpret and administer justice, then the power remains with the judiciary. So the three separations then is what is captured then in another component of the Constitution in the third one, where we are saying that the distribution of power among the various arms of government is key component in any constitution. We are going to see it now, and when we look at constitutions like USA, in Form 4, when we talk about electoral processes and governments in other parts of the world, we shall see how USA exercises the same. So it's not only exercised in Kenya, but any country that boasts to have a constitution that is progressive, then of course must ensure that it makes sure, that everybody then in that constitution or in that state enjoys then the various aspects there. Then also a constitution then must have one of the components of the constitution again is the composition, functions, and the powers of parliament. So it must have the composition of parliament. These may differ from one country to another, but then all the countries, when they are making a constitution, must look at that composition, the powers, and also the functions of parliament. Composition of parliament here we are saying, of course, there can only be two forms of parliament. One which is unicameral and another one which can be bicameral. For example, the Ugandan people, their parliament is probably unicameral. When we go to a country like Kenya, their constitution then is bicameral. Bicameral then means that one is one chambered house, while bicameral then is two-chambered house. Where they have a unitary system of government, countries tend to have a unicameral. Unitary system of government is one that is highly centralized. One that is highly decentralized, like in our case in Kenya, then we have a bicameral system where we have two organs within parliament. That is, one is the lower house and the upper house, can be referred to as by different names. Like in Kenya, we have the National Assembly and the Senate. When you go to a country like USA, we have the House of Representatives, we have the House of Representatives, and we have the Senate. If you go to another country where there is bicameral, like in India, the House then is referred by different names. The Rajya Sabha, then, and the Lok Sabha. So they have different names given to them depending on that. The reason why these countries are different that way is because the constitution provides for a definite composition of parliament and the people who occupy that parliament, and also then the functions of those parliament. For one that are federal, one that is unitary, then the functions sometimes tend to be different in one way or another. So I thought it's imperative I emphasize on that. Then also we have the composition of the judiciary and its duties are there. And of course, definitely in that, a good constitution must also tell us then how the independence of judiciary is enhanced. From, for example, the tenure of office of the occupants there, the Chief Justice, the magistrates, the judges of the high courts, and so on and so forth. So all that must be enhanced, and the presence of independent institutions within judiciary, like the Judicial Service Commission. All these then are meant to create an elaborate structure that is free from interference by the other two arms there. Now, once we talk about that, what are the factors to consider? Because these points are sometimes not there in the books, but you also need to look at them. The factors to consider when coming up with a constitution. Those people who come up with a constitution, like for example, our 2010 constitution has a very long history from the around 1997 when we had the IPPG, the Interparliamentary Group. Then from there, many people came in to try and give us a new constitution. To birth this new constitution, of course, we and people were chosen. Among them, we had this constitutional lawyer known as Yash Palgai. And as the chair of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, then of course, when they were trying to look at the type of constitution we shall have in Kenya that time from 2001, before then I lost it sometimes back 2004, then you realize that a constitution, of course, when they are coming up with a constitution, there are some specific aspects they look at. For example, the constitution of Kenya and that one of Japan are not the same. That's why we say one of the factors to consider when you're coming up with a constitution is the geographical extent of that country, the geography of that country. For example, a country that is one, like in Kenya, is different from a country like Japan, where it comprises of different islands. A number of islands that make Japan as we know it today. So when they are deriving the constitution, in the aspect of sovereignty and jurisdiction within which that constitution is supposed to apply, then they look at the geography. Equally also, when you look at the geographical location of Kenya as a constitution, is not the same when you're deriving the constitution, will not be the same as the constitution of the Union of the Union government in United States of America. Why? The geographical extent in America is larger. So when they are coming up with the constitution, they might decide instead of having a unitary government, to unite all these people, we also need to look at, because it's very huge, can we categorize this country to have a federal system of government as opposed to a unitary system of government? Federal is that we have, yes, one government, but also in that same government we have autonomous, I'm using the word autonomous, independent subdivision in form of states within that union that enjoy their own independence. That's why we talk about autonomy, but at the same time also they pledge their unity and loyalty to the entire state. That's why we have two levels of government in such a very huge state, and it has its own advantages and disadvantages, and therefore that qualifies to be that. But in Kenya, we cannot have a state, then we have states within a state. That's why we have a constitution, of course, which provides for 2 levels of government, but not the federal nature like in USA. This time around, we refer to them as counties, and they are not autonomous because they are much of autonomy that is enjoyed in countries like USA is not enjoyed by the county government. So there is a lot of control from the other arm of government we refer to, sorry, the other level of government we refer to as the national government. So that is one aspect. So geographical extent of that country is a factor to consider when one is coming up with a constitution. If you want to be a very good lawyer, when a constitutional lawyer, that point must sink in you. The other one is the ratio composition of a country. The ratio composition of a country. A country where we have only black people, then has no problem. You can make a constitution that is affiliated to such a group of people. But where we have a multiracial society like in USA, then the constitution must put into consideration the ratio aspect of those groups. The different races. Could be we have pink people, we have yellow people, we have black people, we have red Indians, name them. So, and these people are racially defined differently. So the constitution must consider a way that then unites and brings these people together. The other one is the religious setup of that country. It's also another aspect when you're coming up with a constitution. Like, for example, a country that is that separate religion from state, like in Kenya, in USA, then those who are making the constitution must know, do we really separate religion from state? Then also ask yourself, if a constitution has people who practice different religions and the population is evenly distributed, a country where we have equal number of Christians and equal number of, for example, Muslims, how do you come up with a constitution in such a country? So all that is then a matter of concern, because whenever you're coming up with a constitution, then you must look at that aspect. The other, so far we've talked about geography, racial composition, the background of that country. For example, a country like UK, a country like Britain, then you're going to realize that their constitution, let me use the word UK because of the other parts of Britain and other parts of the kingdom there. The reason why they came up with that constitution is because of the strong historical background about that country. So it looks at even the historical precedents. They look at the historical information that is passed from one generation to another, and they put it into consideration as one of part and parcel of the constitution that is found in the UK. Then also, we look at a country that has a recent history from modern times, the Constitution of USA. Very recent history because USA attained independence in the year 1776. And actually it was made a republic, it was made a union rather, in the year 1784 to around 1786. And they had their own constitution of 1786, known as the Philadelphian Constitution, that they use even today. Why? Is because for them, they have a written constitution. To the other contrary, UK, because of very many fragments of the same the same aspects that rule the people, for them, they have something we refer to as an unwritten constitution. So these are aspects I want you to know because, you know, we taught you in school, but we want to know, other than cramming, can we have a way of identifying things from the reality of what is happening today in the world, or what we know countries have in different parts of the world. So there are those aspects or factors to consider before you come up with a constitution. Let's have a recap as we continue fast. I've defined what is a constitution. I've said what it comprises of a good constitution, the components of a good constitution. Then we have also said of the factors that one has to consider when coming up with a constitution. So a group of people choosing to come up with a constitution must look at that as an aspect. And remember, we said constitution is a very wide term because these principles can be can be applicable anywhere. But then we are saying in a textbook case, to be specific, rather, that this one we are talking about constitution that defines states, that defines sovereign institutions we refer to as nation states. Now we move from there. We go to a question that is very common in the exam, year in, year out. From 1996, look at KCSE all the way, 2006, 10 years, 2016, 20 years, and now 2019, before Corona came. This question will always ring in every student of history. Name the two types of constitution. So now we want to talk about those types of constitution. I want to talk about those types of constitution. Now, there are only two types of constitution. Whether you go to Afghanistan, whether you go to Barbados, whether you go to Haiti, whether you go to Jamaica, whether you come to Kenya, whether you go to Namibia, whether you go to Nigeria, the land of Oga, those are the only two constitutions. Now, all the nations in the world have written constitutions with the exception of only one country, that is Great Britain, that has what we refer to as an unwritten constitution. And I know that is very simple. Now we look at a written constitution. Now, written constitution, like I said, will always be a constitution. Like our constitution, you saw it when we under the 2009, when we were preparing for the referendum. There were those drafts that were sent all over in different languages, in your local dialect, in Kiswahili, in English, for the people to read, and confirm indeed that that is the constitution they wanted, one that was devolved with 47 counties, one that defined conception as one at the time of conception. So we have to, people to ask, are you there? So that if there are contentious issues in that constitution, that is the draft people and to look. And there were questions that Kenyans and to go around and, ask themselves, is this the constitution that we want? Is it okay? How do we feel that in this composition of this county where we have been put, we have been sidelined from our culture, or our other group in our culture in a different other forum? So all these were issues that were discussed and accepted. So we are saying a written constitution and those drafts that were sent to us, we never saw them in different fragments. They came to us as one document. So a written constitution then has those basic principles that define the governors and the governed, that state the responsibilities of the governor and the governed. Those set guidelines then that are applicable in a state are found in one document. Even today, you only have one document, constitutional document. Then we refer to it as a written constitution. We refer to it as a written constitution. And they are consciously written. So when, in case somebody asks you to write about a written constitution, you must tell us that it is, of course, a written constitution, of course, would be the principles that govern the state that are consciously written down in one document. One document and consciously written down is that they are written after a lot of consideration. Consciously written down means that other than consideration, the people are involved. Then a lot of emphasis is placed in this document because it is the supreme document that guides then an entire nation there. So when those documents are consciously written and placed in one document, then that's what we refer to as a written constitution. For example, in Kenya, such a document is one that was promulgated in August of 2010 by His Excellency, the former President Mwai Kibaki. Now, we ask ourselves, what are the advantages of having such a type of a constitution? Why is it that nearly all the nations of the world except Great Britain, then they use this type of constitution? Now, these are seen as advantages or the merit for this type of constitution. However, in the exam, I don't know why students don't like it, as particularly when you are told to explain. But we go through them and we see what happens. One, it is readily available. It's only that I'm in the sharks. Probably I don't carry those constitutional documents. But I remember we shared them in your respective classes, and therefore you should be in a position to understand and to learn from them. Now, one of the advantages of a written constitution is that it is available for reference. A written constitution is always available for reference. So today you can go to national archives of one, you can go to any government office, you still find a constitution there. Any library, you find a constitutional document like in Kenya for future reference. You can refer to that document year in, year out. So the document is readily available, and therefore it's available for future reference there. That is very simple because it's of course contained in a single document. Now the other one is that it is not easily manipulated by politicians. A written constitution is, and I restate, is not easily manipulated by politicians. Politicians, and particularly the breed of politicians we have in Kenya, ours is a really a crossbreed of unique politicians. If we had an unwritten constitution, for heaven's sake, then we would not have a country, because politicians would have manipulated them and come up with their own institutions where they address those issues there. But for a written constitution, then they cannot manipulate. Why? Because the constitution provides for very clear procedures of amending the constitution. They are very well spelled out in the constitution itself. It actually says how the constitution can be amended. They say, and they know those issues then that are contentious, that they must require a referendum to change. Like now, the way we have in a BBI is because we want to change a framework, the skeleton of the constitution itself, then to provide for another shift, maybe from the executive president, then maybe to a parliamentary system of government. I don't know what is in the BBI, but probably even create a position of the prime minister, give more powers to parliament, and then make a ceremonial head of state in the form of a president. So that one cannot be changed by two people. But if it is in an unwritten constitution, and which does not have a very strong parliamentary system, like you're going to see, then of course in Form 4, then it forms a very constitution that then is not very, very strong in terms of defense from manipulation. But then a constitution, of course, must not be easily manipulated there. The constitution must not be manipulated there. So that one aspect. Then the other one is that you realize that a written constitution unites the people. A written constitution unites the people. People are more united in a country because of a constitution that is written, because when writing the constitution, we said it must be written consciously and it must reflect the interests of each and every group in that country. If a country has 42 tribes, 44 tribes, it has 32 tribes, then all those tribes must be enshrined in that constitution to enjoy the fruits of that constitution, to be treated equally
to enhance equity and equality of all, then in provision of services, provision of national cake, sharing of the national cake, and so on and so forth. So that's an aspect that unites all the people, that you see that you're in that constitution, and then the constitution provides for a framework in which then you feel as part and parcel of that country. And we see it, for example, in our Kenyan constitution, because you've seen what is always there in the television, where we are talking about the allocation of revenue, the sharing of the formula for sharing of the national revenue, because every senator wants even those in marginalized area to be considered. It's all about equity. You can imagine that if we did not have a constitution that gives a framework and gives derives institutions like the revenue allocation, like the revenue allocation organs or independent organs that do with that, or does not envisage or did not envisage the creation of a Senate to ensure that the same is provided for the people, then we did have a very chaotic government, a very chaotic system where the interest of majority would not be provided for in the constitution. A lot of inequality like we used to see before when we are in a unitary system of government. Now, the other point is that another advantage other than uniting the people, of course, a written constitution will always ensure that it recognizes, a good constitution must always recognize that some fundamentals in a state should not be easily changed. So here we say that the constitution is not easily changed. So it recognizes that there exist some fundamentals in a state which should not be changed without adequate consideration. And if these fundamentals have to be changed, of course, you have said there are various ways of doing them, and among them, it provides for what we call the referendum, or the various other ways of involving the people through public participation, discussions and forums where people discuss about the issues that affect them, and the same can be passed through their representatives. Those are members of parliament there. Then a constitution also provides, a written constitution will always provide a clear guideline on the procedures to be followed in case of a crisis. So in case there are crises in the country, for example, there are times when we used to have a crisis on, in case the president is not there, who will take responsibility? So in time of a crisis, assuming that God forbid that we lose maybe the president or the deputy president in the same plane and they are incapacitated, they have an accident, and I'm saying God forbid, then the constitution provides a system of change from such to another one. If the deputy president also is not there, then they will tell us that there is a speaker parliament. They tell us that he is supposed to rule for a specific period of time. So it gives us, when we have a time of crisis, it tells us then how we are supposed to walk out of that crisis through the set guidelines that are found in the Constitution. And of course, if there is need to interpret that, we said there is an organ that is responsible for administration of justice and interpretation of the Constitution. And the main institution that interprets the Constitution is the Supreme Court. Although it starts at High Court, the High Court can interpret the Constitution, but the organ, in case of people are not satisfied, in case people feel that the verdict passed in High Court is not enough, then they can seek appellate response from the court we refer to as the Supreme Court, where the president then is the chief justice. So those are some of the advantages of a written constitution. Disadvantages of a written constitution. Of course, it has also advantages and demerits. One of the demerits that comes with an unwritten constitution is that it tends to be rigid. It tends to be very rigid. Something that is very rigid is something that does not provide room for change, does not provide room for change. And therefore, if there is no room for change, it means that that constitution cannot be easily changed. You can see now, if we wanted to change the system of government in the current constitution, which is written, we can see how it has taken us a very long time. At one point, we had even to engage ourselves in reggae through the BBI. And we are even not halfway, because even after all those resolutions that were corrected and drafted, of course, you have to go through a referendum for them to be authenticated and put as part and parcel of the constitution. So that spirit of constitutional change is lacking in a written constitution. So it's a challenge. Number two is that it makes now the judiciary too powerful. Why? Because that's now where you know that our judiciary is very powerful, because it is only through the judiciary that then the constitution can be interpreted. So it makes the judiciary very powerful, because the only institution that can interpret the constitution, no other institution that can interpret the constitution. Leave alone the pedestrian talks you hear from politicians out there, giving all manner of explanation to the constitution. It is only through the judiciary, and I'm saying only a specific number of judges, those in the High Court and those in the Supreme Court, then who can interpret clearly that constitution, which is a disadvantage. The other one is the procedure of amending the constitution is really slow and expensive. You've seen, by the time we are through with the BBI process and we go for a constitutional, we go for a referendum, we shall have used a lot of money that could be used then to do other important things, provide infrastructure. So in a nutshell, then the whole process is really very expensive when we want to have a written constitution, because the referendum, the amount of money used in printing, the amount of money used in hiring lawyers and eminent people to draft that constitution, draft and to make the changes, to bring compromising groups together to an agreement, it's really hectic. And of course, it's a challenge. So that's why we are saying also that one comes in a way then that makes the constitution, which is written, very expensive. Then the other one is that some of the constitution, like in Kenya, that are written, they are very complex to comprehend. Very complex to comprehend. Just listen to people like Akina Nelson Avi and others when they are trying now to explain an aspect of a constitution, it becomes very difficult. Even defining when life begins, from a lawyer's point of view, is the most difficult thing. Because you argue, does it begin at conception, at times of birth, when a baby or is a zygote or is an embryo? All that, then they have different explanation to that. A very good example, look at the abortion bill that was suspended, that was passed by Susan Kihika in Parliament. The way people interpreted that thing, then of course you'd have agreed with me, then that's a very complex way of reasoning. Something that is very different from those who have an unwritten constitution. When they define law, you realize that even in one article alone in the constitution cannot really define something. They have to give one article supported with another sub-article somewhere, an article like in Article 181 of the Constitution. You go back again to Article 91, where you're trying to explain something, but then you realize that it's a bit complex. Even the wording itself means a lot. Shall in Constitution means a lot. Will means something different. So can also, all those, then you realize that it tells you how complex it is when you are dealing with a constitution that is written and you are trying to interpret it. Particularly to a layman person, it becomes very, very, very difficult to try and explain that constitution. Now, the other one, now a written constitution also is very slow to respond to rapid changing circumstances in the state due to its rigidity. So it tends to be very, very, very slow to changing circumstances. You realize that, for example, to accommodate people who are of different sexes to be accepted constitutionally, then whereas some other nations are making some developmental milestones, for us who have a written constitution and which is held by traditions, then it's very, very, very difficult for us to hold to it. This is very common in African states, which hold into an aspect about our nature and how we were created, which is different from the sexual orientation from those in Western countries, in USA and in Europe. And they look at us and they wonder, why are we really sidelining people by nature of their sexual orientation? But then I'm saying it's because it's very, very difficult to change a constitution. The world might be changing rapidly or changing to mode of dressing and whatever, but then in a constitution that is written, those changes are not envisioned. So it does not allow for change from this to that. The Western world may be looking at the whole concept of abortion differently, but because as we have a written constitution that is not progressive as per them, and I quote, then that makes us also to have a challenge with our constitution. So in that point, we must always note that it is slow to respond to rapid changing circumstances there. Then we move from there, we go to the second type of constitution we refer to as an unwritten constitution. Unwritten constitution. Now, unwritten constitution, we sometimes try to look at it as one where it is flexible. It is one constitution that is flexible. And therefore, I said this constitution is only found in the Great Britain or in Britain, the UK. And the British constitution, as we know it, then is where the fundamental principles in an unwritten constitution, the fundamental principles and rules governing the state do not exist in one document, but they exist in many, and underscore this, scattered documents. So that's the difference. Whereas in a written constitution is one document that is consciously written down. Then for the unwritten constitution, it's there are numerous documents that are scattered then into many, many documents. And these are the ones then that we shall look at. What are the sources of these documents that we say are scattered? Then, for example, one source of this constitution in Britain, of course, are customs and traditions of the British people, dating back up to 14th century, times of King George. Then we have acts of parliament, statutes of parliament, or acts of parliament, where we say, for example, the Enclosure Act was an act of parliament that was passed in the 17th century, but is still applicable today in America. We also have, other than that, we have laws of precedent. We have laws that have been passed in the past, case laws. These laws that have been passed in the past, when making judgment, judges refer to them so that they don't deviate from what had been passed in the past. So to create that uniformity, they refer to cases that were judged sometimes back between a company X and company Y regarding breach of contract and so on and so forth. So those case rules are very key. The other one is, of course, work of respected scholars. Work of respected scholars, what they wrote in the past concerning, for example, social democracy, social contract. So all what happens is that these rules once passed, of course, are what then we refer to as sources, and they are not in one document, but they are fragmented and they are shared in different cases there. Then also we have historical information, the historical tradition of the United Kingdom. All these are sources, of course, that are part of the laws, and they are not found, or constitution, and they are not found in one document there. Okay, advantages of an unwritten constitution, they are very easy, these ones. Number one, you always realize that it is a very flexible document, and therefore it's very adaptable to changing circumstances. Very adaptable to changing circumstances. Therefore, it can be easily changed. So it is not rigid like the written constitution. It is simple to amend because amendments here made in Parliament, which is a very strong sovereign institution in Parliament in Britain, which now makes it very easy for them to make and amend the constitution, because the two houses then have representatives representing different people. We have the House of Commons, where people are elected and they have their own representatives. And they have also representatives in government in form of a prime minister. We have the House of Lords, which now protects then the conservative system, the Queen, the monarchy, and so on and so forth. So all of them, they can sit down, make laws, and those statutes then, or the acts of parliament, can be passed within that institution and will be generally acceptable by the people there. Then it is simple to amend, very easy to amend the laws there. It also ensures that there is continuity of the nation's traditions. That is why today when you go to Britain, it is one of the oldest traditions still preserved in a constitutional monarchy. That is the office of the institution of the head of state, the queen or the king. It is enshrined in the constitution. It's a tradition that has been passed down from one generation to another. It is indigenous and therefore suited to a state. It is indigenous and therefore suited to a state. However, it has also some disadvantages. A written constitution is open to manipulation. A written constitution is open to manipulation. It can be easily manipulated by people. It can be easily manipulated by the people. So it's a challenge there. And the other one is that it's the opposite of a written constitution. It is indefinite in scope. Indefinite in scope means that the constitution does not give a scope within which then it's supposed to operate. The spirit of the constitution, we normally, in law, they talk about it as the spirit of the constitution, does not really live within a given area of operation. So it opens up a can of worms in which then the constitution can be misinterpreted. The constitution can change from one form to another because the scope in which it operates then is not definite. It is indefinite. It's not one then that one can say serves a specific area of operation and says that it cannot go beyond that. So that's also a challenge. Now, the other one is that it does not protect the rights of the people effectively. So here you realize that why does it not protect the rights of the people effectively? Where are these rights found? They are found in a document known as the Bill of Rights. Now, in this document that is scattered, it means that even these Bill of Rights are scattered. So therefore, protection of the rights of the people is a bit fluid when it comes then to the fundamentals of this constitution, because it is an unwritten constitution. Now, the constitution also is not precise, and this now may give the court too much work in searching for constitutional guidelines. You know, now for a court like in Kenya, it is very easy to sort out a challenge or a constitutional crisis or a constitutional interpretation, but in a written constitution, it's not in one document. So the judges will need to go to parliament to get statutes and those acts of parliament, go back to the 18th century to know when it was drafted and when it was passed and accepted into law. And then it's really cumbersome when you're dealing with that case. So those are some of the points then that you're supposed to know. And I know those are points that you have and you always refer to them and revise on them before we have the exam. But finally, before I finish on this one, I wanted us to talk about the characteristics of a good constitution. What makes a constitution good? Of USA is the most liberal constitution, followed by that one of France. Why doesn't Kenyan constitution be one of the most liberal constitution, one of the best constitution? What is it then that defines a good constitution? A good constitution must be definite in content, it must be definite in content, and must be specific. So a good constitution must not be vague, must be very specific. If it is a right of a child, must go specific to which child are we talking about. If it is the right of marginalized people, it must tell us who are these marginalized people in the society. And even beyond that, must allow for other organs like the legislature to come up with acts to support and protect those marginalized society there. If it is for the president, it must define who the president is, for how long he's supposed to run, at what age, at what time is he supposed to retire. In case he is incapacitated, it must be specific so that it doesn't leave any stone unturned. Then a constitution also that is written must be flexible enough to enable it to cope with any changes in the state. So that's one thing. And that's where now we are saying, for those with written constitution like in Kenya, the process is very rigorous, and therefore it does not provide the best constitution there, because it tells us that for you to change some contentious issues in that document, then it must go through a process we refer to as a referendum. If it is through parliament, two-thirds majority, and it has also to go through a committee in parliament for justice and legal affairs to discuss and come up with solutions again on some of these issues there. It must also protect the rights of the citizens. Every constitution that is good enough to be defined as a good constitution must always have a Bill of Rights. This Bill of Rights, of course, is founded on the principles on the United Nations Charter on Human Rights, and they are universal. So it must tell us how it protects, enhances freedom of movement, freedom of worship, right to own property, right to life. It must enshrine also in those rights, those that are natural rights, that every person must live with them. And nobody can deny anyone those rights there. Then it must be one that is stable and durable to ensure that it is not easily tampered with. So it must also protect itself from manipulation. It must also provide for amendment as a final aspect, and clearly stating, of course, the procedures that are supposed to be followed when amending the Constitution. And we will be talking about those constitutions there. Now, I think I will have to stop from there and now focus on next time, a very interesting area now we refer to as the constitutional development. Constitutional development and the constitution making process. How does constitutional development take form? From what time can we define having very clear constitutional development? We shall look at the pre-colonial period, look at the colonial era, the time when Kenya was annexed in the year 1885 up to around 1905. Then also look at the period when we had the European settlers, the constitutional development, and we look at the most basic, the scion of this, of course, which was the passing or the resolutions that were passed by the Duke of Devonshire, we refer to as the Devonshire White Paper of 1923. And we shall really want to look at how did the Devonshire White Paper of 1923 change the nation as we know it today, change and bring and make that very unique milestone in terms of constitutional change from the period 1923, which passed all the way up to 1954. And then from there, we look at, from that time, of course, the constitutional reforms passed by Oliver Atherton, Lennox Boyd, the Lancaster House of 1960, the Second Lancaster House, and eventually then the attainment of independence, and those who participated. So it's a very interesting area that we shall try to look at, so that from there then, it will tell us then the constitution, features of the constitution that we have today, the features of the Constitution of 1963 and the features of the Constitution of 2010 and how they differ, and the changes then that were made in those constitutions. Shall look at them from one by one. Those that are in the legislature, those that were made in the executive, and those that were made in the judiciary. Because I remember there's a time we asked that question, the constitutional changes in the legislature between 1964 up to around 1978. Then students were wondering, where was this one taught, how, and when? So that's the most interesting part, and I think you'll allow me to start from there. Nonetheless, I want to give you some points of revision, and write this in your books, write this in your book. Write these questions in your book to revise on what we have talked about, One, define the term constitution. Define the term constitution. Identify 5 components of a constitution. Define the term constitution. Identify 5 components of a constitution. Mention one type of constitution used in Kenya today. Identify the type of constitution used in Kenya today. Then from there, we write the following. Mention 5. Not 5, sorry, mention 3 factors considered when drafting a constitution. The other point is but explain 5 advantages of a written constitution. Finally, state 2 sources of British Constitution. 2 sources of British Constitution. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And I think I will stop from there. So I've seen the first one is you define the term constitution, identify components of a constitution, 5 of them, then name the constitution found in Kenya, used in Kenya today, then explain 5 advantages of a written constitution. And I've said in explanation, I'll need an answer and a justification, because I've tried to mention that. Then also, we have said give 2 sources of unwritten sources of the British Constitution. We have also mentioned the point on you gave the factors considered when drafting a constitution. So, and I've said whereas you look at that, then next time we shall go. Actually, the area of constitution has not been the problem. What we shall talk about next time is the constitutional process, which is the problem. The ufungamano is a problem. Talking about IPPG is a problem. Talking about CKRC, the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and giving a systematic change of how the event unfolded up to the time when we had the Bomas draft, the time when we had the 2005 referendum. Then from there, the committee of experts led by Zamba Kitonga. I know that is where now the problem is. And that's now where we shall talk about it, the challenges that were faced, the achievement up to the time of the post-election violence, the constitutional changes after the post-election violence of 2007, 2008, when then we under the passing of in Parliament in 28th of February 2008 of an act referred to as the National Accord and Reconciliation Act of 2008, and what it envisioned in that, in the 4 agendas that were to be dealt with: historical injustices, draft a new constitution, sharing of power between the 2, creation of the position of the Prime Minister and the President as equal partners, and then also the coming up with a new constitution, the drafting of the new constitution, the work report, the Kregra report, and we shall just highlight them. Then we talk about the referendum of 2009, 2010, and the attainment of the drafting of the new constitution, which was promulgated in 2010. and also the committee of the implementation of the Constitution led by Nyachai Simeon, then and how it did happen there. So it's a very interesting area, a very quite recent, and then I think we shall try to see how to handle that one. But I thought initially it's good to look at the background of this constitution and what is expected of you in the examination. So I'll stop from there, and you are free now to look at those questions, revise, and wish you all the best. So I would have to edit at that point. Thank you.